All right, gentlemen, so we're going to dive into Daniel 8. This is a second prophecy, and this prophecy is about the Medes, Persians, and Greeks, which it does go into in the second half. So we'll go through the first half, we'll dive into some explanation, historical content, etc., and then we'll dive into the interpretation half. I think that when I went over it this morning, I think that'll be a good breakup. So this is the first time we're really studying any type of prophetic writing, so I'm trying to find a format that works good to where we can sort of read it, get some explanation, and then double down on that explanation from the interpretation given to Daniel by the Archangel Gabriel, who makes an appearance in here. And also, some commentators believe that Jesus, the pre-incarnate Jesus, the angelic son makes a appearance in here like he does in Joshua and some other places in the Old Testament. Like he did earlier in the book of Daniel in the furnace, right? So we'll see if he makes a second appearance. I believe he does. I think it's a valid point they make. So let's dive in. In the third year of the reign of King Belshazzar, a vision appeared to me, Daniel, after that which appeared to me the first. So this is the second vision, and we see here, first verse, he's tying these two together. He's saying, hey, here's a second vision. The reason he does that is because this vision so closely resembles the first. It's the same subject matter. That same subject matter is made known to him, and he's letting us know off the bat, like, hey, this one ties in with that very first one. And I saw in the vision, and when I saw, I was in Susa, the citadel, which is in the province of Elam. And I saw in the vision, and I was at the Ulai canal. I raised my eyes and saw, and behold, a ram standing on the bank of the canal. It had two horns, and both horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher one came up last. So we know that in Old Testament and in New Testament, a horn is a symbol of power, right? It's a symbol of authority. So he's pointing out here, hey, this is a symbol of authority that I've seen, and one, it has more authority, more power than the other. The one with more power came second, but it's in the same creature. This is the imagery of the Medo-Persian Empire. So it's actually two groups that came together to create one massive empire that conquered the Babylonian Empire. So we see that here, and again, the big horns, high, very high. So it's just, he's really, we're seeing that this is a powerful entity. There's two powerful entities in one body here, in one creature. I saw the ram charging westward and northward, southward. No beast could stand before him, and there was no one who could rescue from his power. He did as he pleased and became great, which is exactly what happened, right? The Medo-Persian Empire came from the east to the west and charged every direction and conquered, and nothing could stand before it. And I was considering, behold, a male goat came from the west across the face of the whole earth without touching the ground, and the goat had a conspicuous horn between his eyes. So now we have a second creature, which is representative of the Grecian Empire, the Greek Empire, and it comes across the earth without touching the ground from the west, right? So we know Babylon and the Medo-Persian Empire was modern-day Iraq and what we think of as the Middle East today. And Greece, we know, is over in the Mediterranean Sea near Italy, that general area, right? So we can see, again, even geography matching up here. And the Greeks were nobody at this time. They were no one. So it's awesome because this prophecy is being given 200 years before Alexander the Great, who this represents, who we're going to talk about in a second, came into the picture. 200 years before any of this was even going to take place. It's being disclosed to Daniel by God. And the goat had a conspicuous horn between his eyes. He came to the ram with the two horns, which I had seen standing on the bank of the canal, and he ran at him in his powerful wrath. I saw him come close to the ram, and he was enraged against him, and struck the ram, and broke his two horns, took out his power, toppled his power, just as Alexander toppled the Medo-Persian Empire. And the ram had no power to stand before him, but he cast him down to the ground and trampled on him. And there was no one who could rescue the ram from his power. Then the goat became exceedingly great, but when he was strong, the great horn was broken, and instead of it came up 4 conspicuous horns towards the 4 winds of heaven. And again, we see here prophecy and history clearly fulfill this prophecy. Alexander the Great, at the peak in his early 30s, suddenly dies. That's when most men, most emperors, most powerful men like he was, they're just hitting their stride. That's when they're starting to conquer, right? That's when they got it figured out and they're taking over the world. He fulfilled his purpose of toppling that, and God stopped his expanse. And from there, 4 generals, his 4 top generals, took command of his kingdom and split it up into 4 different sections. Again, 200 years before any of this happens, and we have very specific prophecies foretelling events that would come to pass later, very clearly in history. I mean, it's not like, oh, well, it could. Medo-Persian, 2 things of power in 1 creature get toppled by something from the west who's great, then that falls and is split up into 4. And history fulfills this. Out of one of them came a little horn, which grew exceedingly great toward the south, toward the east, and toward the glorious land. It grew great, even to the host of heaven, and some of the stars it threw down to the ground and trampled on them. It became great, even as great as the prince of the host. And the regular burnt offering was taken away from him, and the place of his sanctuary was overthrown. And a host will be given over to it together with the regular burnt offering because of transgression, and it will throw truth to the ground and will act and prosper. So it's talking about the horn. It is the horn. Then I heard a holy one speaking, and another holy one said to the one who spoke, "For how long is this vision concerning the regular burnt offering, the transgression that makes desolate, and giving over of the sanctuary and host to be trampled underfoot?" And he said to me, "For 2,300 evenings and mornings, then the sanctuary shall be restored to its rightful state." So here we have numbers. So this is where my math had to come in this morning. And I think I've told some of you, me and math are not friends, right? When you start adding letters to numbers, that's not math, right? Yep, I never even got past algebra. Luckily, this is just some basic division, so I could handle that. So we see here a little horn rising up out of one of these 4 horns, right? So once this Alexander the Great's kingdom broke up into these 4 separate little entities, right? There was one, the Syrian branch, that got strong. And it actually would go and attack Egypt, and there was all sorts of stuff that would happen with this one specific king. His name was Antiochus Epiphanes. I'm not the best Greek speaker, so we're going to hope that sounds about Greek, right? It sounds pretty Greek. And this is where these numbers come in really interesting. So before we've read, it would always say a certain amount of days, right? It would say so many days until this, so many days until that. But here we have something different. It changes up. It says days and evenings. It's very specifically separating the 2. And now there's 2 ways we can look at this, and I think both ways are appropriate, to be honest. So you remember yesterday I was talking about the times and a halves, numbers, this, that, the third, ways, different ways to interpret them, and how it's very possible that all 3 ways to look at these numbers are all right. It's possible that some are right and some are wrong. It's very interesting how this works and how God's hand works in all of this. And here is another example. So we see here that it's very specifically said days and nights. Not just days, but days and nights. One way we could look at this is dividing it in half. So 2,300 total days and nights combined. So 2,300 half days. So if we divide that in half, we get 1,150, which is just shy of 3.5 years, right? Using year-day interpretation, going both forward and backwards on this one, right? So, because if you remember yesterday, I was talking about, hey, we can look at it as days. We can look at it as literal years. We can look at it as days that represent years. And sometimes we will look at it all three ways, and sometimes we can look at it just one way. Here, if we take that and take those days and convert them over to the total years, 3.5 years is how long Antiochus trampled, persecuted, and desecrated the temple in Jerusalem. What would happen is he would go and try to conquer Egypt or conquer another land. He'd get his butt kicked, essentially, come back, and on his way to get some money to help soften his blow, or because he wanted an ego boost, he would attack Jerusalem. And he would decimate it, right? This is a Grecian emperor, essentially, right? He would just decimate Israel. And at one point, he stayed there, and for 3 years, just desecrated the temple, and he persecuted the Jews. He tried very hard to eradicate the Jews and the Jewish religion from the face of the earth. So again, we see, if we look at it this way, it's matching up with history. These numbers are matching up with history. We do see here where it specifies 2 separate days and nights. Now we could also look at it the other direction. Double the amount, right? We could double it going the other direction. And if we use, again, year-day interpretation, that puts us in the future. Something that hasn't passed yet. Right? So if we're going the other way and do the exact opposite thing with this, right? Instead of converting it from days down to years, going this way, we convert it from days going up to years, going that way, and double this, we have the future. We have like the year 4000. And we're not there yet. And none of us, we're told, are to worry about the future. It is very possible that God gave this prophecy to Daniel to foretell future events that have already come to pass. And it is also very possible, and there's plenty of precedent for this, that events that have already passed in history for us are foreshadowings of things to come. Right? We saw that in the book of Joshua. I mean, Jesus' actual name was Yeshua, Joshua. Same as Joshua, right? And Joshua, the leader of the Israelites, took them over the Jordan, the river of death, through a baptism, dying with Christ, there's imagery there, and brought them into God's promise, the promised land. Right? We see that foreshadowing there that took place in actual events in history. And it's very possible that this prophecy points to both the desecration of the temple by Antiochus and also points to future events. That was foreshadowing. We don't know. But both of these are biblically sound ideas. And this is what comes back to me yesterday explaining, when we look at this stuff, we need to look at it objectively, but also with an open mind, being willing to learn and willing to take in viewpoints that we haven't heard before or haven't considered before, and willing to not try to fit it into the box that we've created for it. But we're also not to just willy-nilly come up with some really radical, crazy things that are quite imaginative. There are solid rules. There are solid premise that Bible scholars for all of Christendom have used, all of ancient Hebrew, the ancient Israelite times have used to interpret prophecy and look at how it plays out. And that's where we have due diligence on our part, not just creating random things and following some of the established rules, such as the year-day interpretation. And we can take that both directions, right? We can use that to reduce or to multiply. So, again, it's a big thing. It's a big subject, and I think that's why a lot of us shy away from it. But we can see here it's so important to dive into it. It's so important to put the effort. I don't understand a lot of this. I'm not going to pretend like I know all of this, right? I don't. I'm learning, but I'm excited to learn because we do get the opportunity to see, well, Daniel's prophecy was fulfilled. It was fulfilled in a sense, and it could continue to get fulfilled. It could be foreshadowing. We see playing out for us in history God's divine hand, his providence. And it's wonderful. And sometimes it takes a little bit of work. Sometimes it takes a little bit of admitting, man, I don't know all of this, but the part that God is revealing to me right now, that's powerful. And that's awesome because it reaffirms our faith. It just reaffirms and it gives strength and it builds up and reinforces those bulkheads, right? We can point back when people say, oh, that's tomfoolery. That's a bunch of like just nonsense and things that you guys wish up. It's like, really? Because here's this prophecy that was fulfilled. Here's this prophecy that got fulfilled. Here's this prophecy that got fulfilled. If all these things historically have been fulfilled, you tell me that that's hogwash. You tell me that it's just some side of imaginary stuff that people make up that's not real. There's a word that's escaping me right now that I want to use, and that's why I'm jumping around to such crazy explanations and descriptions because I can't think of the word. Superstition, there we go. You tell me how superstitious this all is when we have prophecies that are clearly fulfilled in history. And for us, because we're believers, we know that God will not only use prophecy for short-term fulfillment, but also foreshadowing of things to come. And now, that may seem scary, right? Because if there is something horrible, this big desecration that happened, that means there's potentially big desecration and persecution in the future. But Daniel knew that, right? And we see that at the end of chapter 7. In verse 27, he says, and the kingdom and dominion and the greatness of the kingdoms under the whole heaven, everything, all power on earth, that's what he's saying here, all power on earth, shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High. Yes, there may be persecution. Yes, that could be foreshadowing. We don't know if there's foreshadowing there. Maybe it was just simply fulfilled in this Medo-Persian Empire being toppled by Alexander the Great, and then this guy who rose up out of those empires persecuting the temple and the Jews for a short period of time. And maybe that's all there is to it. Maybe there is more. But even if there is more, that's fine because there's more beyond that. You know what that more beyond that is? That more beyond that persecution is that everything, all the kingdoms, shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High. His kingdom shall be an everlasting kingdom, and all dominion shall serve and obey him. Praise the Lord. Daniel knew. Daniel was shown by God, the same as we are here. No matter what comes, no matter that it may trouble us, right now we can really apply this, right? We can look on the horizon and see really scary things possibly coming down the chute. Look beyond that. Knowing that the kingdom of God will reign, that everything will be put under his feet, and it will be given to his saints. All the power, all the glory, all the love, all the grace, all the mercy. That's the kingdom that's coming. That's the kingdom that we are part of. That's what we have been adopted into and bought into by Christ's blood. Daniel saw that. He saw these prophecies, and I'm going to power through the end real quick here because we'll see where even at the end of this prophecy, it ties into the end of the last prophecy, and we'll wrap up today there and get our day started. Picking up in verse 15, when I, Daniel, had seen the vision, I sought to understand it, and behold, there stood before me one having the appearance of a man, and I heard a man's voice between the banks of Ulai, and it called, Gabriel, make this man understand the vision. We know who that is, because who can only command the angels? God. Jesus. So he came near where I stood, and when he came, I was frightened and fell on my face. But he said to me, understand, O son of man, that the vision is for the time of the end. And when he spoke to me, I fell into a deep sleep with my face on the ground, but he touched me and made me stand up. He said, behold, I will make known to you what shall be at the later end of the indignation, for it refers to the appointed time of the end. As for the ram that you saw with the two horns, these are the kings of Media and Persia, and the goat is the king of Greece. And the great horns between his eye is the first king. As for the horn that was broken, in place of which four others arose. 4 kingdoms shall arise from his nation, but not with his power. And at the later end of their kingdom, when the transgressors have reached their limit, a king of bold face, one who understands riddles, shall arise. His power shall be great, but not by his own power, and he shall cause fearful destruction and shall succeed in what he does. So we see here the appointed for the end time. This could be the end of the exile. It could be the end of the Jewish age, which this was the heralding into, right? This was right before the period where God stopped speaking, or when God stopped speaking to the Israelites, the calm before the storm, the calm before Jesus came and ushered in the era of Christendom, the kingdom of God, the end of the old, the beginning of the new. It could be talking about prophecies far in the future. So again, we see here multiple different ends that this could be referring to. His power shall be great, but not his own power. It wasn't God's power, it wasn't his power. This was demonic power that was powering this man, right? That's what it's referring to here. And he shall cause fearful destruction and still succeed in what he does, and destroy mighty men and the people who are the saints. By his cunning he shall make deceit prosper under his hand, and in his own mind he shall become great. Without warning he shall destroy many, and he shall even rise up against the prince of princes, and he shall be broken, but by no human hand. The vision of the evening and the mornings that has been told is true. But seal up the vision, for it refers to many days from now. And I, Daniel, was overcome and lay sick for some days. Then I rose and went about the king's business, but I was appalled by the vision and did not understand it. Even Daniel admits he didn't understand it, right? And we see here just the different things. This very well could line up with what this Antiochus did, right? He persecuted the saints, God's people. He stood there, he defiled them. His reign was marred with different deceitful and shady actions and different things that he did to try to jockey power, right? But again, we could see this referring to things in the future as well. But lastly, the thing we're going to end on is Daniel did not let what he saw beat him up. He was sick. He was laid up sick from it. He was so distraught. But looking forward to the future, knowing that Christ's kingdom was coming, that God would reign supreme, that beautiful, wonderful kingdom was to come, he got up and he fulfilled the duties that he had. God gave him work to do with his hands. He gave him places to go, duties to carry out, and he got up, not dwelling on the darkness, but focusing on the light, on the God, on our Savior. And he did what God had for him to do. He did it, and he carried out those orders, and he did it for the glory of God. And that's what we're to do then, even when things look dark, even when we see darkness on the horizon, even when things are making us sick to the stomach. Don't dwell on that. Focus on the light, knowing that God conquers all, that Jesus has come, his kingdom is reigning, his kingdom is coming in full fulfillment, and get up and do what God has established you to do for his glory. Carry it out. Focus on the light, not on the dark. All right, gentlemen. Who has some prayer requests?